This is TWiT.
Actually, Foursquare was back after 10 years. Foursquare was discovered at South by Southwest 10 years ago. That was its big breakout moment. And Paris Martineau was on the TWiT on Sunday talking about her article. She got a little peek at what Foursquare is up to these days, and it might be just a little bit disquieting. Turns out Foursquare is not gone. Far from it. They apparently are one of the big data brokers for location information. And
it's a pivot that worked.
It was a big pivot. Now, the thing is, I remember when they launched Swarm and they said Foursquare is going to be the place, like a guide, but Swarm's what you use to check in. And I kept doing it for a while, but I stopped. Turns out you don't need to play Foursquare or check in on Swarm for Foursquare to know exactly where you are. They're collecting information from a lot of apps on a lot of phones. They have, during South by, I don't know if you saw this, Stacey, they released a demo of this called Hyper Trending that had bubbles where the most people were.
I think this is really interesting, and the writer of the piece is right. This is both creepy for many people and cool for other people.
Actually, it was Dennis Crowley who said, "We're not sure." We said we're not sure if it's creepy or cool.
But I like that they threw it out.
Yes.
At a tech event. I actually would draw the parallel with this and the NBC story that you have on scraping people's photos for facial recognition.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
there's a very clear parallel here about people. This actually makes clear what data is being collected in a way that is pretty visceral for people, and it does it in a way that still respects their anonymity, which I think is the best possible way to do something like this.
But it misstates it because you are not, in fact, anonymous in the actual data that Foursquare sells people. You are identified by a unique advertising ID, which I think wouldn't be too hard to de-anonymize you. So, yeah, and Crowley, who's the founder of Foursquare, said, we're not sure if it's a responsible thing or not to have a view like this in the phone yet. I don't know how people will react to seeing a heat map in real time of where all the phones are. I can imagine some people would say, oh, that's the coolest thing. And some people would be like, that's the creepiest thing. Well, and so they wanted to put it out there. But I think they don't. What they're doing is misrepresenting it a little bit because, yeah, these are just anonymous blobs. These show numbers. But in fact, the data that they're selling is much more specific.
It shows also, well, in the, not this version, but in the game they were talking about, also showing, replacing that unique ID with an avatar and a fake photo and then showing the demographic data. I think, so I get what you're saying. This sort of tracking is happening and people kind of assume it's happening, but they don't know what that really means. I think this gives them a nice window to start understanding what that means. And I think anyone who freaks out about this, that's totally fine. Then they're going to say, wait, how does Foursquare know this? And then they're going to suddenly realize when they look into it that Foursquare has companies like Uber, and I don't know if Google does, Uber, Twitter, they're all using Foursquare's code to get your geolocation information. And to feed more information back in, I presume. Yeah, and then they'll actually be like, wait a second, can I get out of this? And I think that'll start a really important conversation. Also, like, so we're going to switch. Go ahead.
I wish it would, but I don't think that this hyper trending thing does that because it's understating what they're actually doing. In 2014, Foursquare launched Pilgrim, which you cannot see, a piece of code that passively tracks where your phone goes using Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, GSM. It identifies the shop or the park or the restaurant you're visiting, feeds data to its partner apps, of which there are more than 1,000, and that's, location apps like Twitter and Uber. Pilgrim and the company's Places API are an integral part of tens of thousands of apps, sites, and interfaces. As Foursquare's website says, if it tells you where, it's probably built on Foursquare. But what Paris points out is, yeah, it's anonymized, sort of, but there is a unique ID, and there would be all sorts of nefarious ways to use this. She says, what if you notice the same guy in a few different locations and you had this data? It wouldn't be hard at all to put a face with a number and say, now I know where he is, and as long as I can get this data, I can see where he is at all times.
But consumers don't have that data, and they're clustering people in this particular app.
But that's the point. This app doesn't show what they're actually doing. This is a bowdlerized app. They took the good stuff out, the stuff that, yes, you and I don't have access to, but plenty of other companies do. They have an API that is much more granular than this.
I still think it's a good point and a good place to start the conversation.
Well, I'm glad they did this much, but they need to do a lot more.
So here's my question.
Also good they showed Paris Martineau what they're really doing, because that's much more dramatic. They know they have an ID for you, Stacey.
I know they have an ID. I mean, everybody has an ID for me.
Well, Verizon got in a lot of trouble for having an ID for its users. They got fined.
Oh, the cookies, the super cookies? Now, some
but you're
of these
right.
IDs,
I'm sure it's not just Foursquare. Google's got to be doing this. Apple's probably doing it. Other companies are doing it as well.
Oh,
so we need to have that
are you familiar with Euclid?
What's Euclid?
It's a company that tracks Wi-Fi. They keep a unique ID for everybody's handset based on their Wi-Fi.
There you go.
Trying to join Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah.
So yes, but this is happening everywhere. It's not just Foursquare. It's not just like Foursquare is doing location. I would also say, I don't know if you're getting a super valuable service. Like, I don't care that Twitter knows my location, but that Uber knows my location is really important to me. It's the bedrock of the service.
Although I could point out that Uber could get your location by asking your phone in the Uber app where you are. Uber knows where you are, but apparently is collecting more information than you're volunteering.
Well, that is true. That could be true. I don't know the terms that Foursquare has with Uber, but one of the challenges with GPS in certain areas is that it doesn't work well. So having an overlay like Foursquare is probably helpful.
Maybe that's all they're using it for. Okay.
Question?
I don't know, though.
So we'll switch roles here. Stacey's all in favor. I'm worried about Iran and Turkey.
Yeah.
And Russia.
No, my point. That's my point precisely. A malicious actor. Let's say Putin says, we got to take Stacey Higginbotham out. She's really.
Well, no, forget the individual. Forget the individual.
But it could be an individual.
A cluster of demonstrators heading to a place.
There you go. They're starting to mount up in Tahrir Square.
That's what I'm saying.
They have cameras, though. I mean,
they have the means to track those people already.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but you could see groups starting to coalesce. You could see other things.
Yeah, you're right.
With this data.
You could see people's phones. Now, that's why a lot of demonstrators try to hop off networks and use like peer-to-peer networks. I mean.
That's right.
I think there's probably going to be, if there isn't already, we're going to continuously see a development of protocols for people who are protesting. And I think it's good. And I think some of the things are, hey, how do you use a decentralized peer-to-peer app on your phone to talk to people? How, like at home, you're going to regularly go through Tor. I think we're also going to see things like people tweaking their makeup and their hats and everything else to avoid facial recognition. And I think those are actually some of the more interesting things to watch because it helps us it's the other side that most people don't see that lay bare the surveillance kind of state and surveillance capitalism that we have. So I don't know. I don't think this is like the worst thing. I think it's actually a decent conversation starter. And I like the fact that it self-destructs after 2 weeks. And, oh, yes, this is my other thing. Wait, hold on. No, well, what if they delete? Well, they're not going to delete all that data. Foursquare has the same sort of subpoena things that Google and Facebook have. They fight that. So, I mean, you can't argue against this if you're going to be like, yeah, I love Facebook and all that it's done, or I'm okay with Google having access to all of this data, which they do and more. And they also have unique advertisement.
Yeah, my concern is not the individual level because your phone company knows it already.
Right.
Apps know it already. This is not new in that sense. The question is that notion of another view of coalescing and using our freedom of assembly. So it's in the aggregate that it bothers me more than the individual.
I
would flip it on its head, and I would say, how cool would it be to use something like this and check out how many people are at the DMV when you want to go?
Yeah.
How cool would it be?
I love it. Google Maps does that already. It'll show you when you want to go somewhere where the busy times are.
It's incredibly valuable to stores.
And it's valuable for people counting or understanding, you know, I think people counting is actually a really under discussed and under thought about way that we could actually use phones to help people like just make their day better. And I'm thinking of things like, hey, if I have to go to the ER, can I see which ERs have the most people? Could we build a service based on something like this? We're not now because there's no profit in it. But those kind of services are highly valuable, and you could do that with this. I don't know.
We are all carrying tracking devices, and I agree with you. It's a good idea for Foursquare and others to start the conversation so that we understand we're not taken off guard by this. I think part of the problem is it's hard for humans to put 2 and 2 together sometimes. And while we're all kind of aware of the fact that our phone knows where we are and our apps know where we are, we don't think about other consequences of it. You said face recognition. This actually doesn't use face recognition. This is based.
Oh, no, the parallel is to the NBC story on people.
We'll get to that, but I just want to say that the point is if you combine this with face recognition, you're suddenly de-anonymized.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, honey, you're de-anonymized anyway. I mean,
everybody knows Leo.
Everybody knows anybody they want to know. And if you combine all this data, I mean, I think, you know,
yes.
When I think about the Bourne movies, right, and you watch them track Jason Bourne all over the place with what it seemed at the time very advanced stuff like cameras everywhere and stuff. That's now chicken feed compared to the they wouldn't have any trouble following Jason Bourne at all nowadays.
Right, you would have to 3D print your own like new face mask. You would have to. I'm not kidding. You would have to do something crazy like that. You wouldn't have to. You'd have to not have a phone.
Well, Mr. Robot.
Use apps.
I think it's funny that you're arguing in its favor and Jeff's arguing against it. It's just completely blowing my mind.
We just conspired before the show, Leo, to do this to you.